Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here this afternoon. I just want to follow up on some of the C18 conversations with Meta, Ms. Curran. Does the impact of C18 create a vacuum on your social media platform? Certainly it restricts Canadians' access to reliable news content, but does it provide a way that more disinformation or misinformation is available on those platforms?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, we would say there is lots of credible information still available on our platforms. There are academic institutions, there are government pages, there are politicians' pages, there are pages from non-governmental organizations and civic organizations. All of that information is still available on our platforms, including information from regular Canadians, which we would not characterize as misinformation either. However, look, as a Canadian, I'd love to see Canadian news back on our platforms. We'd love to have the opportunity to put it back on our platforms, and we could do that tomorrow if C18 were repealed or if we were scoped out of that piece of legislation.
Thank you very much. I want to, witnesses that we've had so far in this study have indicated that Russian interference is used across the political spectrum. There's no right or left. In fact, contrary to what my colleagues across the way have alluded to in the past, it's not a far-right phenomenon. And media reports, in fact, have indicated that of the 90 key accounts that promote pro-Moscow sentiments, 33% are controlled by people on the far left. So I'll ask you, YouTube officials, what does this mean from your perspective with respect to their tactics, Russians' tactics, and how you're seeing this deployed maybe in other countries?
Thank you so much for the question and for the opportunity to weigh in. I will ask my colleague John to share some of his insights here.
It's actually fair. Common to see these actors work both sides of the political spectrum. It's important not to over-index on any specific operation because many of these operations have a counterpart that's focused on the opposing audience. I'll give you an example. The remnants of the Internet Research Agency, that was the group that was so active in 2016, the elections in the United States. They're still around, or remnants of that organization are still around, and there's a very recent operation that was sort of right-facing. But prior to that, they were doing a left-facing operation or sort of left-wing facing operation. So it's not uncommon to see them work both sides of the angle. The other thing I think is really important when it comes to this activity is there's just no favored version of the truth, right? The point is often to flood the zone with narratives that are often completely contradictory to each other.
Right. So thank you very much for that. I want to maybe ask across the platforms that are here, there seems to be a tone potentially that, rather than taking responsibility for their role in dealing with foreign interference, that it would be easy for government to point the fingers at the social media platforms that they're solely responsible to make sure that no foreign interference, no disinformation or misinformation is ever available to the Canadian public. Now, having said that, what do you think governments should do? And it was alluded to just recently about misinformation or disinformation campaigns, so they don't reach Canadians without interfering with their right to expression. And is there things that government can do to work with social media platforms to ensure that the right of expression is still upheld, but we do some work to prevent the dis and misinformation? I'll start with Meta.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague David Agranovich, who can talk about the work that we have done with governments elsewhere, and I'm happy to chime in with the work we've done with the Canadian government as well.
Thank you for the question, and maybe I'd break my answer to 3 key points. The first is the more that we aggressively enforce on networks on our platforms, the more we see them nebulized both across the internet and increasingly rely on tactics that look more like Cold War style traditional espionage tradecraft. And the people who have the best visibility into that activity are often government or law enforcement organizations. We welcome information sharing from security organizations that might have better insight into nation state intelligence services or their proxies, so that we can then use that information to key our own investigations on our own platforms. Second, we're very careful in our own public disclosures, both to avoid speculating about the potential for influence activity and to make sure that we're reporting critically about the effectiveness of those operations. We see, for example, a Russian network known as Doppelganger, which has been the focus of quite a bit of public reporting recently. Very focused, less so maybe even on reaching real people and more so on making themselves look like they're really good at reaching real people, right? Oftentimes these organizations are selling a story to their bosses or their funders as much as they might be trying to sell a story to their targets. And so governments in partnership, I think, with us, civil society organizations and media, we can be really careful about how we talk about these efforts, not to make, for example, Russia to sound as all-powerful as they'd like us to think that they are. And then third, there are, I think, concrete tools that governments have that could meaningfully make these operations more difficult. One of those is the fact that governments can levy geopolitical power, whether that's diplomatic sanctions, financial sanctions, or things like information sharing, like we saw with the Tenet indictment, that can then enable other actors to take action. The second would be, we've noted, for example, influence networks increasingly rely on off-platform web domains. So just websites that we certainly can't take down, even if we try to block them. Yeah. But the content then persists across the internet. We published a report last year with some concrete recommendations for governments thinking about.
There.
Sure.
Thank you.